Welcome everyone. Hi, this is the. Oh yeah. Oh, is there some theme music to come on to? Sorry, you want to do that, Dennis? No worries, mate. This is the only panel like this that happens all year. And this panel is specifically about one thing, which is kind of the remix culture, how to remix, who's remixing. On the panel today, we've got an amazing lineup, which is just full of luminaries. Right on the end there, we have Phil Mack, who is a fantastic producer of kind of vintage drum and bass stylies. We've got a real remix there. We've got right next to him is Kev from Cinema Music. Welcome. He's also a remixer and has loads to tell us. The mighty Abel Reynolds of Finger Licking Records, who's also putting on a massive gig and got to get down there pretty soon. Next to him is Alex Zicatron, the lawyer, who's come all the way from Malta to give us a talk. He's an expert on remix law and using samples. Next to me is Malcolm Roxburgh, and he's putting together an amazing project called the Remix Space. And I'm Chris Tofu, and I'm from this event. Kev, tell us about what you do.
Okay, so during the day, I run a sync company where I find advertising briefs, work with advertising agencies, and help small independent labels get their music used as much as possible. In the evening, I DJ and produce, and I supply samples to people. Supplied samples to Fatboy Slim for the last sort of 3 or 4 albums. Responsible for the Rizzle Kicks Mama Do the Hump chorus, and starting to work with other producers at the same time.
Wow, tell us a bit about your syncing work.
Okay, so the sync world is mainly advertising, film and TV. Back in the day, you only had the sort of 4 channels and the budgets were massive. Nowadays, with the internet and all the digital use, the budgets for sync use are much, much smaller, but there's a lot more opportunities. There's now sync licenses for YouTube. You can get music used on Instagram, but the money used for your music is a lot less. There are lots of companies like mine that are helping small labels to get their music out there. My particular favourite is the small independent labels rather than the sort of big majors. They've all got sync teams who are constantly licensing their tracks to TV, film, adverts. A lot of people who make music and who run labels believe that every song they've made would be great on an advert, but the reality is that the creative directors and the agencies, they're your customers, and their taste in music is very different to a record label's or a musician's taste in music.
Abel, for you, we wanted you here today because you've been involved in so many projects, both as inside of Finger Licking Records and before. And you've kind of seen where this whole remix culture's come from. Right now, London, for me, and I think for other people, is just so good at remixing everyone else's culture. That's why one of the reasons why the English music business is so fat as well. What is your experience of kind of seeing where this remix stuff has come? Where did you first ever hear of somebody remixing anything? And how did it apply to you?
I guess when the whole kind of like rave sort of scene started, there was people would put out the original record, with the original dance track, and they wouldn't necessarily get remixes of it done. I guess remixing originally started in the sort of like Larry Levan re-edit, Danny Kravitz kind of like time when they would take old tracks and re-edit them and extend certain bits, and that was the basis of it all. And then when dance music and rave culture started in the 80s, they'd put out the originals, and you wouldn't tend to get too many remixes of it done because there was only one style of dance music really, it was like rave. And then as it started to splinter off into its different kind of categories, people would get remixes done to cover drum and bass, a techno. And in days when people actually bought music and dance music was growing into its different kind of families, big labels would suddenly go, right, we're releasing a pop tune, let's do an R&B remix, let's get an electro house remix done, a techno remix done. So they'd release a package with 5 or 6 remixes, and the idea of that was to get their track into different markets and try and make more money and make it hit within the clubs of those particular scenes. And they'd pay out quite a lot of money on it. As people have started to spend less money buying music, the record companies have cut back on the budgets that they spend on remixes. And so you're finding less and less people doing remixes for money. So when they release a record, they'll only get 1 or 2 remixes of it done. They won't get as many done in the package. Through technology and the way it works now is a lot of artists and producers themselves are now creating their own remixes illegally of a release and putting it up through SoundCloud. And that's their access to the market. And then sometimes the record labels will see that someone's done a remix that they've uploaded to SoundCloud, it's getting a lot of hits, will contact that person and then say, can we release that as part of our package? So that's kind of like come back in that way around. Remixes, A&R people I find are very lazy. A lot of A&R people are very lazy. They would just want someone who's just done a good remix in a style to do a remix of their band and to do it exactly the style that they've just done. For example, we had an artist called Lee Coombs who did a remix of a band called New Order on Pete Tong's London Records, and the track was called Crystal. Did the remix, absolutely huge. This is, 10 or so years ago. Absolutely humongous. Smashed it, and then Pete Tong played it all the time, and it was all over Radio 1, blah, blah, blah. Suddenly we had this whole strew of people getting in touch saying, can we get Lee Coombs to do a remix? So you do a remix, you'd hand it to them, and they go, oh, can you make it sound more like Crystal? So they're not doing it from an artistic point of view, they're just doing it from a marketing point of view, and it's just ticking boxes. Counter to that, I find that a lot of remixes tend not to be the best remixes of people when they take something and they really switch it around, and they take something and they switch it on its head, rather than get the track that could be a vocal pop tune, put a house beat under it, and then just run the whole vocal over the top, slightly speed stretch it, put it in time, is a kind of lazy, boring kind of remix. And I think the king of all remixes has got to be, he doesn't nail it every time, but the king of all remixes has got to be Armand van Helden. Because if you take 2 records like Professional Widow by Tori Amos, if you listen to the original record that it was, someone in the record company decided to get Armand van Helden to do a remix of it, and he completely flipped it on its head. He took certain vocals from it, made it into a catch, and created a genre of music. He kind of sort of on the big speed garage kind of tunes. He did take the same method with the Sneaker Pimps and Spin Spin Sugar, but those are 2 remixes where he's taken something and he's really brought a creative input to it and made something different with it. And I've done everything apart from remixing myself. So I've been, as the label, commissioning remixes, and then being the artist management, and discussing about getting the remixes. And one of the things I always try to do is try and get something that is slightly different, that's going to bring an added package to it. So if you've got a drum and bass tune, what's the point in getting another drum and bass remix of it done? And so I think, the legal remix business is an art form with itself. It's picking the right person to do the remix. And sometimes you get it wrong. You can spend money on getting a remix done and they hand it to you and it's not very good, you don't like it, it's not going to succeed, and it's a bit of a gamble. But I think nowadays, through the illegal remix world, we've got artists that have done a remix of a famous track that's on Universal Records. If only we knew someone who had the keys to Universal's back catalogue. And then this track that was California Soul. So an artist of mine did a remix of California Soul, and we put it up on SoundCloud, and it's had nearly 1 million plays on SoundCloud. We get contacted every month to license it to people to put it into syncs and adverts, and we just can't do anything with it because we don't own the catalogue. If I'd have thought about this before, we could have done a cover version of it, and that would have evaded doing the master clearance, and it just would have been the publishing. So we could have done that, but we weren't thinking fast enough on our feet at that time. But through him doing this illegal remix that's been on SoundCloud, had 1 million plays, it's increased my artist's popularity. The legal position of that, as you'll go on later on, is slightly grey, because no money has changed hands, but you've made the person more popular. So I think that remixing is an important part of the dance music industry. I think it brings old music to life. Sampling was something that people really hated years ago, and Stetsasonic did a brilliant record called Talking All That Jazz, where they sort of talked about how they took old samples and they brought it back to life. And I think that's what a lot of remixers are doing now, is taking old stuff, bringing it back to life, or taking other music and bringing it into a new market. So it's an important part of the industry, without a doubt.
Coming back to California Soul, we're talking about A skills here.
Yeah.
I don't suppose explain to this audience or the massive thousands of millions of people watching us on the internet. Abel, could you just tell us a few of who your artists are, just really quickly? I didn't explain that, so I just want to rewind to that.
Currently on the management company, we've got A Skills, Crafty Cuts, Freestylers, Plump DJs, The Correspondents, an act called Evil Nine, an act called Star One. I think that's it on our current. Oh, Shades of Rhythm and Dramatic Trees.
And also, Finger Licking had in the past also worked with some American artists as well. Is that right? Or I was reading about
no,
it.
we sort of signed one-off sort of singles, and then I guess with Finger Licking, we was a record label, released over 100 records, and did a sort of million units over 15 years.
Wow.
Before that, I was a radio plugger, and so I'd work on various different things. And one particular remix I feel quite proud of sort of doing, it was Speed Garage was getting kind of popular in the 90s, and there was a track called Rosie Gaines, Closer Than Close, and I used to go to this Speed Garage club quite a lot in the 90s, and there was a DJ there called Tough Jam, so I got Tough Jam to do a remix of this Rosie Gaines, Closer Than Close, which basically made their career. And so certain people who've done remix, I didn't even mention this, there's certain people, I mean, Timo Maas did a remix of Azido DeBass, Doom's Night, and it made Timo Maas's career, and he, literally that is the one that you know. So you get the right. I mean, Todd Terry did a remix of Everything But the Girl, Missing, and that was the one that broke Everything But the Girl, or re-broke Everything But the Girl in the 90s and got the radio play.
It's really important. There's a lot of mysterious people in the background on these remixes, aren't there? I mean, coming back to that California Soul, so why didn't everybody knows that track, and everybody played that track and danced to it a couple, maybe 3 summers ago or something like that. Maybe I don't know, but why didn't the record label just go, yeah, well, obviously, we've got 1 million hits on YouTube. This must be something we can make some money out. Let's make a deal. Why didn't
I guess
they
we
do that?
sort of we kind of went to. I mean, I sort of tried to do it through the back door because I was worried that if we contacted Universal and they didn't particularly like it, they could say, yes, you haven't sold anything, but you've made your artist more popular, so he's earned more money in his DJ fees, so we want some money. So I guess the artist was slightly worried about that, and I guess we tried to speak to people at Universal, and Universal is the bigger record companies are such a big machine that no one actually knows who deals with that particular bit. And so there was no, you speak to the catalogue department and they'd be like, oh no, you've got to speak to this person. So he sort of ran around the houses for a bit and then sort of just didn't really sort of follow it up really, if I'd be brutally honest. And so it's a shame. And so I spoke to, spent, a good 2 or 3 months trying to speak to various people within there, but just didn't get anywhere.
I'd also suggest that the major record labels are too big to deal with, because I have to deal with them for licensing existing song without changing any of it to put it onto an advert. And a lot of the time, if the contracts they've got in place don't cover new media, the contracts for California Soul probably didn't mention, yes, you can get a remix done of it. And there was an a cappella of California Soul, but they never said, if someone wants to remix this, does the artist agree to it? So they've got to go back to their original contracts, which probably didn't mention new media and remixes because they wasn't done at the time. It also wouldn't mention YouTube and the internet, which didn't exist. So all you're doing, I think, is making more work for them, and for a lot of those people, it would need to make a lot of money to make it worth their while. Yeah. And it's their decision what they believe a lot of money is. So if you said, we've got a new Coca-Cola advert, I'm sure they'd go through that contract. Yeah. But lots of people, because there was an a cappella, loads of people have done, Diplo did a mix as well, and so lots of people have had a remix at it, and it's their choice whether they believe something's worth their time or not, which I think is one of the problems with the smaller catalogues that they own when it's Universal anyway.
I've had the same experience working with Universal. They own 75% of all music in the whole world. I mean, they got, for Chess Music and Stax, which are those great old blues and rock and roll guys, they've all got those guys on one guy's desk, and he's got another 20 other labels to deal with. It's terrible. Phil Mack at the end here. Phil Mack is from a genre which loosely you could say was vintage music that's been remixed in some way. Phil is doing it right now, every day of the week. He's turning out amazing new tracks which kind of mix, like, somehow managed to get really old warm sounds from 50 years ago, 60 years ago, and turn them into kind of banging drum and bass very successfully. So Phil, as somebody who's working at the coalface of remixing right now, what sort of problems do you come across? Because I know you were always finding amazing things you want to use, but you can't really get them out.
Definitely sampling is an issue. I mean, I find these amazing old tracks, and I go and I use them, and I've been the same thing, put them up on SoundCloud, and people really like it, all that kind of stuff. And I've tried to make the phone calls as well. I've tried to kind of ring around the people. Oh, how do I get permission for this? if you persevere, you will eventually get somebody on the phone who you can speak to, and all, but it all gets incredibly complicated. Actually, what I've started doing recently is, okay, I have a bunch of those tracks, and they might be useful at some point. I've been starting to actually recreate some stuff from scratch myself, basically, and then I kind of remix that. So I might actually, I was working on a Prodigy remix recently, Out of Space. So I said, right, I'll play a bit of piano, get a vocalist to do on top, and then I treat that as the remix, and I kind of remix that. I've been finding that the slightly easier way to kind of move forward on some of the projects, but definitely there's a big need out there for being able to get easier access to samples and stuff in that way.
Yeah. What about you, Kev? When you're looking at syncing and stuff like that, I'll just say to everyone that the biggest pain in the arse for a guy in syncing is to have somebody like me turn around going, "Oh, I got so much music. Oh, you're going to go crazy for this stuff." And then I turn up and he's like, "Yeah, right, that's Michael Jackson."
I think it's not so much the artist, it's more who owns that music. So you were saying about Stax. Stax was bought by Concord, and they are a massive company, and they've got too much music. And when I think the difference is because we're passionate about the music, we have these ideas, and you think, well, let's make this happen, let's make that happen. But you've got to go for the people who own the music in some way, and usually because of the master rights and the publishing, the rights to clear a sample or use something in sync is usually down to 2 or 3 different people, and that's only if it's written by one person. There's still people who own the sound recording and people who own the publishing, and they're usually 2 different people.
It's a very complex situation, isn't it? But it's going to get a lot easier in a minute, because actually we have a sort of a lawyer who actually practices in this. Just before I move on to there, before we move away from these 3 guys here, what about stuff that's out of publishing? Stuff that's over 50 years old. How do you guys?
It's a really grey area at the moment, because everyone disagrees on something that is out of copyright. There's songs that are out of copyright in the UK and Europe, and that is different to something that's out of copyright in America.
Yeah.
The recording only is out of copyright in the UK if it's after 63. The publishing stays in for 100 years after someone's died.
Which is pretty much.
So the out of copyright is very grey at the moment, and depends who you talk to. I talk to people who are not willing to risk a massive lawsuit by saying, this is out of copyright, so it's public domain, so we're going to put it on an advert and use our recording, and then you have to pay us. But there's a whole small industry starting up of people taking out of copyright sounds, remastering them, and saying they own the remaster. There hasn't been, as far as I know, a court case yet regarding that, but that's my awareness of it.
I mean, speaking from my own world, I'm from the land of electro swing. I work with Freshly Squeezed. We're only about vintage music that's been remixed and stuff like that, but it does strike me as insane that up to about 1950 there was like 1 billion releases, and we can't get our hands on enough of them. It's just crazy, and that's the real time of music. What is the law? Ladies and gentlemen, Alex Zicatron has come all the way from Malta today. He's a producer, and he's also a major expert in copyright law. So guys out there who are doing remixes, who are thinking of doing remixes, Alex, what are the different categories? What is Creative Commons? What is not? And tell us about that stuff.
Yeah, so I guess this is probably the question I get asked most often. People expect, a wave of the magic wand, and it's like, it's so simple, and that's how it is. But in reality, what these gentlemen have described, I mean, that's the reality. It's very nebulous. There's loads of gray areas involved, and to a large extent, whenever someone is actually remixing material without getting any clearance, there's always a risk involved. I think one should start by analyzing what the material is. So probably one should start by choosing carefully the material to be remixed. Well, the simplest scenario is obviously when material is public domain, but again, it's not so simple because it's not always so easy to determine that. And one should also bear in mind that when we speak about copyright, there's not one right, but it's a bundle of rights. So when we speak about copyright, we're speaking about the author's right, so the composer who wrote that music. There's recording rights, and then there's also the so-called related rights, mainly performance rights. these rights can belong to different persons or entities, and they can also have different expiry dates. So when we speak about public domain, the most maybe straightforward case would be, let's say, classical music. So, if someone wants to remix Mozart, Beethoven, obviously the author's rights would have expired on that, but that does not mean that you can pick, a recent recording of a Beethoven symphony by the London Philharmonic Orchestra, which was done 10 years ago, because there's also the performance rights involved there of the musicians involved, and also the recording rights. It gets even more complicated when we're dealing with material which is not in the public domain. In that case, well, the rule of the thumb is always that one needs to identify the rights holders, and one also needs to make sure that if there are different levels of rights involved, then one needs to approach all those different rights holders. Quite an interesting case in this regard is a case involving the Verve. This was back in the 90s, and involving Bittersweet Symphony. And this was quite a particular case because actually the orchestral part that everyone loves from the Bittersweet Symphony, they had actually cleared the rights for that recording. It was a recording done by an orchestra, but that was a recording of a cover version of from the Rolling Stones. So what the Verve or whoever was dealing with this with licensing, what they did not realize was that it was not enough to get clearance for the recording of this orchestral piece, but also one had to go to the original songwriters. The Verve ended up getting sued, and basically they had to give up 100% of their royalties. And it's quite a particular case because you could not say that they did not act in good faith. They really, unfortunately, they tried to handle this in the best possible way. But copyright law is a minefield, and one really does have to tread very carefully. I think I've spoken too much already.
Alex, can you just explain what Creative Commons is? Because, I mean, I'll quickly start.
Yeah.
I kind of know what it is, but you know what it is. But
Yeah.
Creative Commons is really important because it's kind of music you can get your hands on, because the makers of it have said that's cool, but the whole of the internet at the moment is kind of running a lot on free stuff, isn't it, really? So artists need to decide where they want to go there. So tell us about Creative Commons.
Yeah, so Creative Commons was the brainchild of an American law professor called Lawrence Lessig from San Francisco. For many years, he was one of the so-called copyleft intellectuals, who were arguing against the whole structure and the whole mechanism of copyright law, basically arguing that copyright law is a legal system which was set up as a response to the inventing of the printing machine by Gutenberg. So, and in fact, when one actually does analyze copyright law, it's pretty much steeped in this mentality and terminology. It's based on the terminology of the printing press, where you're controlling copies, you're controlling distribution, you're controlling lending, and so on. And the problem with copyright law is, and this is what Lawrence Lessig obviously argued about, is that even though technology has changed radically from the 1800s, we still have pretty much the same legal system based on those same concepts, which struggle very badly to cater for new media, especially digital media and the internet. So Lawrence Lessig's response to that was to say, hold on, by default, when someone is a copyright holder, all rights are reserved. This is the famous, all rights reserved phrase we've seen on backs of CDs and books and movies. But not all artists want actually to have all rights reserved. Most of them are actually cool with the fact that other people can download their material, can remix their material. So what Creative Commons set about to do was to create a community where creators who did not want to keep all rights reserved could actually say, this is my material, not all rights are reserved, but only some of them, or no rights are reserved. And what Creative Commons does is it creates a very neat framework for this to happen through a system of 6 different licenses, which authors can choose from. And depending on the license they choose, they can grant different levels of rights. So one of them, which is called the share-alike license, allows basically the author is saying you can do whatever you want with my material, but whatever you come up with, you must also give the same rights to others. In other cases, you can choose a license where people can reproduce your material, but not for commercial purposes. What's clever about the way Creative Commons works is that besides the legal license, which is attached to each license being chosen, there's also it's also expressed as a machine-readable code, which is actually embedded as metadata into that particular file. To make this clear, Creative Commons does not deal exclusively with music, but it deals with all kinds of creative works, including photography, literature, movies, and music, of course. And its usefulness lies in the fact that whoever wants to use material without getting into this whole minefield of rights and clearance, with Creative Commons, you know exactly what the deal is. So you know that there's permission from the author, and their permission allows you to do this, and that.
Any of you guys got anything to do with Creative Commons? I mean, you've all got artists who nobody, with respect, from the past, some of your artists, nobody might know they exist at the moment or have listened to their music for years. What if those artists just went, okay, we're putting all our old back catalogue that no one's going to listen to for years right up there? I mean, is that a naive idea, or am I being stupid, or what?
I think it's the same. To me, it's the case that Danger Mouse came up against when he created the mashup album of the White Album versus the Black Album. He did it as an art. He claimed it was an art project. Paul McCartney said it was a great idea. Paul McCartney loved the idea of it. Jay-Z was up for it because he released the acapellas and he knew people would do that. But they don't control their music. EMI are the people who got upset with him. And I think that's the thing. So an old artist who wrote a song can say, you know what, everyone's rinsed that song, I'm going to give it away to the public, everyone can try new interpretations or whatever they might feel. They don't own their own music anymore. The record label that released their music, they own it. So the guy earlier was talking about Pledge Music, saying you retain your rights. So in 20 years, if you've just had a #1 song and you were on Pledge Music, you could do that. Most of all this old music was put out by a record label, and all these artists have signed away the rights to their records, to the labels, to the publishers, and it's those people who would take umbrage at someone remixing it.
Yeah, so much stuff not being able to use. It's like frustrating. So, Phil, anyone else got anything to say on that? What about you, mate? What about all your tunes that you're sending me every week? And what if some of those could just go up there and everyone can have a go at remixing?
I mean, the thing is, I've given up so much music away free, and actually, at the end of the day, I think anyone who gets into music, you're doing it because you just want people to enjoy, what you're doing and to share in it. So I started by just giving it all away free, and then you get more followers in SoundCloud, and you kind of build up a bit of a following like that. And then you start getting messages around the world, and people send you videos of, hey, look, I played it on this night, and all that kind of stuff. So that's actually the bit that inspires me to do it in the first place. But I think it gets to a point with any artist where you just want to take it up to that next level, where you want to, there's a certain type of people that maybe aren't getting access to your music because it's not being sold or things like that. And that's when you end up getting this difficulty. You need to take that step into the mainstream, and you need to actually solve these problems up front. Yeah.
Well, I think there's other ways of making money as well, isn't there? There's this whole kind of sketch where Ed Solo does a killer remix, puts it up on YouTube, or someone else puts it up on YouTube to some old Mickey Mouse video and gets like 60 million hits and walks away with £60,000, right? Mm-hmm. So there's those whole things being missed on the remix as well, isn't there?
With the Creative Commons stuff, if you're an artist and you put up your copyright to people to use, then Chris does a remix of my copyrights. Mm-hmm. It does well. Kevin here then puts it on an advert.
Yeah.
Do I get any of the income as the original copyright owner?
Well, that is definitely an issue.
Or would it go to the remixer?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on which license you choose, because as I said, there's 6 different licenses.
Right.
The most the most open license is the one where you say you can do what you want, and whatever money you make, good luck to you. Whereas in other cases, you can say you can remix it, but you can't release it commercially. So that would then take us back to the drawing board, really, because the moment that happens, then if something is released commercially, then it's up to negotiation. So Creative Commons doesn't really create the structure for exactly who gets what. It really leaves that between the parties concerned. What it's really doing is creating an easy way for people to know that it's cool to use someone else's stuff because they're allowing that.
Is it different? Didn't the Americans have something called fair use, which a lot of the hip-hop community have taken umbrage against, because there used to be a whole industry around mixtapes where you didn't clear the copyright because you put them out on mixtapes, and America has a thing that if you're putting something out for art, as long as it's not making a certain level of money, it's called fair use. Is that similar to the Creative Commons, or is that an old copyright usage thing?
Fair use is actually, I mean, it's a concept under American law, which is pretty much, it's pretty much open to the interpretations that the courts give it, because it's an exception from the general rule.
Right. Okay.
The difference with Creative Commons is that it creates a structure, and you know exactly what you're getting.
Right.
Whereas with fair use, I mean, it's very much open to interpretation. The thing with fair use is that it used to be interpreted much more freely and much more widely in the past. And unfortunately, the trend is that the US courts are really narrowing this interpretation now. Back in the 90s, yes, it was pretty much accepted that if your sample is not too long, if it's not really cutting away directly into the sales of the original, then that would be considered to be fair use.
Right.
But now the noose has really been tightened, and 10 years ago, 2005, there was quite a landmark judge case, Bridgepoint, which basically said, even 3 seconds, even 3 notes from a track, that's subject to copyright protection. And this has really influenced the way even European courts are now interpreting this. Recently, there was a case in Germany involving Kraftwerk, and basically said, even shreds of sound are subject to copyright protection, even a small part of a beat. So this, the whole fair use concept, it's very much open to interpretation.
We at London Remix Festival, coming up next is our Speed Date Remix, where we ask loads of bands and remixers to sit in the same room and speed date, because we are finding bands in our world are so slow at remixing, it's unbelievable. And coming out of that, we had an absolute brainwave, which was to try and create a place where people like, say, cumbia bands, swing bands, bands outside of the world of remixing, like we all live amongst loads of producers at this side, could go and get their tracks remixed around the world, and not only that, have their rights protected. To this end, the Malcolm Roxburgh here and Mr. John Bongley down there have been working their faces off to try and get something, to get to the beginning of the end anyway. And let me just hand you over to Malcolm, and he'll tell you how we see the world being remixed in the next few years.
Okay, thanks very much, Chris. Start getting this up. Hopefully on some of the spam communications you've got in the last week or two about this event, you've seen something about this. It's a new website which we're really launching as of now. Just to explain a little bit of the background. There's a lot of logos on there, so it's probably worth explaining what's what. I work for Continental Drifts. Continental Drifts runs a project called Global Local. Global Local, its job is to find emerging talent from the diverse, underrepresented cultures, primarily from London, and provide mainstream exposure to those individuals. There's about 20 major festival stages and, 10, 12 local authority events. So about 30 stages over the summer that we project is also about artist development and trying to move those artists to work in new places and to pick up new skills and to try and develop them. The whole thing is an Arts Council funded project, and as part of it, London Remixed features as one of the major events. And again, the logic here is as part of the artist development, we've got seminars like this, we've got various bits and pieces going on that we're able to pull those artists in and try and get them working in different ways with different types of people. And of course, if you've had a look a little bit more at this, what Chris has just talked about, the London Remixed speed date is something we've done where we work in a speed dating format, introducing people who want to do remixes, producers, to artists, people who are creative and come up with ideas. And you just do it as standard. But they've been great fun, actually, and they've been really good events the last couple of years. We really enjoyed doing them. And I think so have those who've been involved in them. I urge you to come along afterwards. And at the end of these, you'd have spoken to, I don't know, 30 or 40 people about what you do, and you'd get some ideas, and you'd probably meet some people you quite like the idea of working with. But there were always really three major issues hanging over the event afterwards. And they were really, first of all, data, that to actually work with somebody else, to exchange stems, to be able to transfer material is actually quite a hassle. This is not stuff you can attach to an email and send. It has to be on a CD or a USB stick. You have to arrange to go and see somebody. It's not just a question of hitting a button and this happens. You have to spend some time and effort investing in it. So not as much took place as we were hoping for. The second problem is that, we've been talking about it for the last several hours. It's about the rights and rights management. How do you eventually apportion rights on the material that's created using one person's ideas with another person's production? And can you find a way of making that an easy conversation to have? And the third problem is, those of us that took part in it may remember this, that you'd meet 40 people and you'd think some of them are good to work with. The next thing you'd know is about 3 weeks later, somebody would email you or send you something through the post with a CD saying, will you work on this with me? And you're thinking, who the hell was that? And it doesn't quite facilitate in quite the way we wanted. So this is where we got to. And a couple of years ago, we sat down and thought about this and thought, well, what can we do about it? And we came up with a fairly simple idea, which was the remix space. And the remix space was going to be a part of our project, the Global Local Project for global local artists and other people that wanted to come in and work with them. It's kind of social networking site that gave you the capacity to upload and download stems. And the idea would be that when you work and participate with somebody online, you would just agree that you're going to split whatever proceeds come out of this in advance. So remember, we're working here with a lot of bands that are not signed. We've got no copyright on that material, so they're in a position to upload that and say to other people, do you want to come and work on this with us? And we get this flat sort of agreement to split stuff afterwards. So, okay, that's where we got to. We asked the Arts Council, we had our grant come up for renewal this April. We put this in as part of the artist development, and they said, yeah, no, that's great. So this is what we've done. And that's what we're going to have a look at today. I'm just going to show you a few bits and pieces from it. And then we'll talk about where we think it goes next. So I can probably run this live, but it's always safer to do it from slides. If you go onto the remixspace.com, this is what you'll see. You're asked to go in and sign up or sign in. So you've gone onto the page, it tells you who we are, what we do. It's got some tracks from the people who remix down one side. You log in and it takes you to here. From here you've got a list of tracks that people have posted onto the site. The codes there are, if there's a little green button, it means that there's a set of stems associated with that track. If not, you can listen, you can search, you can see if you can find material on there. Well, it doesn't look that sophisticated, but in a sense, you'll see in a minute, it doesn't need to be. So you've got a set of material there, a set of things that people have uploaded. You can download stems, you can do what you like from there. But that's only really part of what this is about. The other side of it is if you go onto the track and you can see who's composed it, or you can then go to that contributor's homepage, Sorry, that's me looking. So this is all test data you're seeing at the moment, but there you go. And on that, you've got the standard social networking features. You can have a conversation about the stuff that people have posted. You can, you become friends. You can form groups. All the kind of normal social networking stuff. So hopefully, what you do is you hear something somebody's posted. You go and you start talking with that individual. You start creating new networks and new communications that way. Of course, you can keep a track of what you're doing, and this kind of explains how we divide the world up. So at the top, you've got submissions. What stems have you downloaded to the track? Projects, other people's stems that you've downloaded that you're working on. And then, of course, we've got playlists and saved searches and all the rest of it. So you can kind of find your way around it. But we expect quite a lot of the navigating to various bits and pieces to come through the interaction in social media rather than through search functions on the site. So that's kind of what we'd put in place for the, there's a little bit more to have a look at. So obviously, yes, here's where you go and upload. Now, the point of this screen is not tremendously interesting, but the point of it is that it's down at the bottom. There's, as part of the downloading or uploading material, you're asked to sign up to terms and conditions which say that I will split any proceeds that are made from this collaboration with the other user. And in fact, there's pop-ups there which weren't working as of about 20 minutes ago, but will be there, I'm sure, very shortly, with much more sophisticated terms and conditions in them. But I mean, essentially, what we're trying to do is cover ourselves off legally at that point in the process, so that when we get to a later point where people want to publish, there aren't any barriers and there are already agreements in place. Okay, so it's probably worth standing back and having a look at the process flow of what's happening here, and I've got some little diagrams to do that because it gets quite interesting once we get past the stage we're at. So let's start here. I mean, what's going on here? If you've got somebody, a composer, or somebody who holds the copyright, or maybe master rights holder, is able to, well, it'd have to be the copyright holder, would have to submit a mix of a particular track and the stems to the remix space. And as part of doing that, they sign up that this is something that other people can come along, download, and do stuff with. Now, in practice, what we'll do is we'll give them a number of options about how that works. Either they can post it and give anybody permission to remix. It will have to be by request, so you have to get to them and say, can I remix your track? Or they might decide if it's a major artist that they're going to go in and ask people to remix by invitation only. But that's a control they've got over that, the songwriter. Second control they have is, well, once somebody's actually done something with this track, what can they do with it? Do they need to come back for your sign-off before they can publish it and make money out of it, given that they already agreed to give you half of it? Or is it something that you can just go ahead and do, or it's essentially up to you to choose at that point. Anyway, so let's say somebody comes in, and the standard one might be anybody can remix, but they have to come back to me to make sure it can be published. So you've got that in place. Along comes a remixer. Remixer downloads the stems and produces a something with that. Now, at the same time, the remixer is also signing the same agreement with the site saying half of this belongs to the original artist. So in effect, what we're trying to do is create an agreement between the artist and the remixer at this point to say, whatever you guys do, guys, you kind of own half of it after the process is finished. And this is what we kind of said we'd do as part of the artist development side for the global local projects, and that's kind of what we've got and where that's what's going live today. But what we think is that we've got the capacity, or maybe we could develop this a great deal further and make it a lot more interesting. It's only quite a small step to doing this, where what you can do is you can have somebody who's in charge of the project, of the remixing, who can also start to pull in other individuals on the site to contribute. So in this case, it might be a session musician coming in to produce a track. Again, what you'd be doing is agreeing that they'd be paid a certain number of points on any release. They can provide the stem back, and again, you've got that contract in place with the site, which sort of identifies who's getting what from any royalties. And great, okay, you've done that. You can upload the track back. But what now? We've got a track. We've got permissions. We know who's meant to be owed what on it. It's all done. What can we do next? And I suppose the obvious answer is, well, if we've got all of the information, then in principle you could do the registration of this with the it can all be done automatically through interface specifications. We can just fire the stuff up to the rights organisations and register it and Similarly, you could send it to the online sales services. And again, you're not doing marketing, you're not a record company, but what you are is you're providing the income streams a route to get back to the individual. And of course, you could even build that into what we're doing here. So you could have it so that you could use the Remix space as a publishing company, and again, it could pull the money back in from the revenue streams and divide it back up to the contributors in the way that they agreed. So that's kind of the vision that we might be able to get to without, I mean, again, there's all sorts of barriers and legal barriers to overcome, but that's kind of where we're trying to get to as a workflow model. Okay, I mean, I do think that there's a way in which we can potentially exploit this further. I think there's a major, you know, if you're a master rights holder, this potentially talks about legitimising and making some of those opportunities that are so difficult to negotiate with them actually happen, because in this case, you're not going to a Universal or whoever and saying, well, you know, we need to negotiate about a particular track. What you're saying is where you've got the rights to do so, you know, we could exchange these musicians sitting at the top here on this diagram with, you know, the guy at the record company that owns all of the master rights. They can provide the stems for remixing. They, again, will be potentially then able to get other people to release that, make money from it, and have the money go back to them. Now, if they are owning catalogues that potentially are going to expire, well, I mean, I know that's not going to happen. It already has happened to an extent with some data material from the early 60s, but you could then provide them with a new income stream for back catalogue material, which doesn't require them to do a lot of work. It's just something which they can make available to users of the sites and then creates new money back for them. So potentially then, you know, we are gazing into the future somewhat here, but that's where we think it might be able to take us. And there are two challenges in getting there. One is that, you know, the development costs to do that would be quite high, and that's not the way we're funded. We're a small arts organisation, and the legal complexities of doing so potentially could be quite difficult. So I'm very pleased to have Alex working with us on making sure and legitimising what we're doing so that we are protected should there be legal troubles down the road. So there you go.
Yeah, thanks, Malk. Yeah, Remix Space. The beginning of the end starts today. One of the most amazing things we found out about Remix Spaces comes out of this festival. It's not so much, although there's lots of acts in London and we're ready to sign up, you know, get all those guys up there. It's actually when we're in places like Australia or Japan or other places like that, it's people who are living in places like that making incredible music that maybe none of us have ever heard, maybe some traditional musics. You know, whole Aboriginal record labels want to put hundreds of tracks up and stuff like that. It means that our producers in the UK, the Ed Solos, Cinema Musics and all that, can get their hands on some extremely strange samples from Mexican brass bands and stuff like that. So that's what kind of really excited us. And we're about to just go on about 12,000 of those bands and see what comes out. But ultimately speaking, Remix Space is great because our genius is in the computer world of doing things automated, like registering for services and for costs and rights organizations, that actually a lot of this stuff went down to record labels in the past. And right now, apart from a few really great underground and indie labels, record labels aren't really doing anything, and it's leaving a lot of artists in a position where they don't know what the hell they've got to do anyway. So hopefully, I can only say really the future of these sort of disruptive technologies, pledge music type, they're disruptive technologies because the old system just doesn't work for new artists these days. Anyway, anyone else on this panel want to say anything?
Do you take any percentage of the money on the... If a remix comes through there and it does get licensed, do you take a percentage?
Currently, no. This is something which supports the global local acts, about 70 or so acts that we work with over the course of a year, as you know, as a something that comes as part of that project. Sure, if this gets developed, it's going to need to be self-financing. Just licensing the back-end technologies and the server space actually takes up all of the grant that we're getting. It would need some fairly substantial investment, and the only way that's going to happen is to have presumably a proportion of the income that's coming back into the site taken, but that's not currently what we're doing. And I think it's an internet startup, so you want to attract as many people by providing something free as long as you can, and then switch around to something that's that's profit making in the future. But that's not the way it's working now. No.
I'd also, although I was talking earlier about specific copyrights and who owns them, I'm also an advocate for just putting records out. A lot of the biggest and best dance records that have ever been made, and also some very traditional songs that we all believe, started off as illegal mashups. Auld Lang Syne was an illegal mashup when it was first released. That's my favourite trivia that I bring out at parties. It was a poem that they set to music, and no one knew who owned the music when they set it to music, and they sorted it out afterwards. Sugar Hill Gang, Rapper's Delight, was sorted out afterwards. The Source, You've Got the Love, was sorted out afterwards. So I would also suggest anyone out there who does make music, I wouldn't worry about legalities initially. You might eventually lose a fortune, but
in other years we have had people sitting here who've gone, they've lost fortunes.
Yeah,
so
and they might have done. But I would also say that if you stop legalities, if you let legalities get in the way of creativity, Rapper's Delight, Auld Lang Syne, You've Got the Love, most of Fatboy Slim's career would never have happened. And I've got trivia galore of samples of who's used what and how they've got caught. And I think that I believe nowadays that in the early days of sampling, it was Wild West. De La Soul, they put out albums. Yes, they got caught, but if they'd never released that album, there'd be no De La Soul. And I think that because of the amount of money it would cost Universal's lawyer to find me and sue me is more money than I make from putting out records. So I believe that we've gone back to those Wild West days where now all the songs that you're finding, I would say you might be better just putting them out there and seeing what happens, because if you suddenly have a hit on your hands, Universal will answer the phone to you. If you're suddenly the biggest thing on the internet, these people will take your phone call, whereas until you are, they won't be bothered with you.
No, I think that's probably right. And I mean, the intention is, at this stage it is very much about trying to get unsigned acts working with producers. But yes, I mean, if it becomes successful, then maybe you could take it to them and say, do you want to do something with this? But we're not at that stage yet.
And there was also, there was an advert recently where a mashup was used for the first time. My attitude to most things is, let's make it happen. I was told for 15 years that Bob Dylan doesn't do adverts. He's just done a co-op advert. All the rules are always changing. There's a guy called, I'm going to get his name wrong so I won't say it, there's a guy that mashed up Marvin Gaye and Mos Def. He puts out mash-up albums. He put out a Fela Kuti, De La Soul one. An advertising agency fell in love with it and they made it happen. It's completely illegal. He gave it away for free. He got paid because he created the meshing of those songs together. So I would suggest that people don't let legality stop them, but at some point when someone starts making money, that's when you would try and sort it out.
I mean, I do feel, though, that we've seen an increase in the fear that people have of legal action being taken against them. And certainly, as Alex was explaining, we've kind of seen the legal judgments become tighter and tighter around this. And I think there is a generalised fear out there that if you are successful, then there is some bad thing that might happen to you, and therefore people don't do as much as they otherwise would.
When I started putting out records, I chose a DJ name of a famous criminal because everyone I spoke to said, if you sample Michael Jackson, you'll go to prison. If you sample Queen, you'll go to prison. So I did, and I didn't go to prison. And I think that if any of them had suddenly made lots of money, those people who owned those copyrights would have got in touch. Because was it you that said A&Rs are lazy? If something suddenly makes an interest, they'll suddenly start turning up and talking to you. I've done mixes that would be classed as illegal for major record companies as promotional tools. So they know the music industry as well as we do, and they work within it the same way that we do. They know that until you get to a certain level, you can put out things that are infringing copyrights.
But at the end of the day, they're about the bottom line and profit. So I mean, the way to talk to them is assuming that that's the way in which they're going to view the world, and are you offering them something which will improve that? If you are, they'll talk.
I'm also pointing out, I'm not here for entrapment. Don't someone make loads of money off a copyright and then blame me that bloke on the stand said it was all right.
Yeah, Universal, if you're watching, which you probably will be. He's only joking. Can I take some questions from the audience, if there are any? There's a question at the back there from Dead Dog Mountain.
So you're invoking the original law of copyright?
Who are you talking to?
Sorry?
So you're all evoking the original law of copyright, which is if you didn't want to be heard in the first place, shut up.
Yeah? No, I don't know.
I guess that's a statement on the question.
Is that a statement, though?
Says the lawyer.
Of course. Speaking as an innovator, a writer, and a publisher. If you didn't want to be heard in the first place, shut up.
I might agree, but unfortunately it's not much of a defence when you're up in front of the court.
Put me in front of court, I still say that's my defence.
Well, there's another question from this extremely tall, handsome gentleman down here. Called Will.
Hi. There was a lot of don'ts covered in the course of the discussion. It was really interesting to hear the thing about the website, because that's kind of a really good kind of grassroots way to access and do's. But I guess I'm wondering, I was also really interested to hear the thing about, just blag it on the basis that they'll become interested at the point at which you've got some success.
You're in the...
Interested has a number of...
But I guess I wondered if between you had a few, because I think there's two main routes that remix gets produced. One is someone just wants to make a banging tune and they have an idea and they put together whatever it is, California Soul, and it sounds brilliant. And at that point, it's not really a commercial thing. But then, if you do that a lot, then some people become remix artists, therefore. And what do you suppose the do's are of how you structure a project so you're not necessarily going to come into all these pitfalls later? So like you were saying, cover it. Get a band to cover it. Are there some more things like that you could maybe suggest for emerging remix artists to avoid the bear traps?
I would think one thing is that there are people out there who are kind of starting to think about remix a bit differently. So I don't know if you guys have seen Postmodern Jukebox. Like they've been doing some stuff where they call it reimagining records. So their idea is, they create everything from scratch, and they're a band essentially. But their thing is that they remix by playing things in different styles. So they'll, take some rock record and they'll reinterpret it as, ragtime or, New Orleans jazz or something like this. So there is actually a different angle on it you can take as well. And I feel that's kind of the future of remixing. I liked what you talked about earlier about kind of flipping on its head and bringing in something else. And how many records are there in Juno now where somebody just stretch the samples and put the beats on top? And I think the whole thing needs to move forward a bit. So, you try to have that effect you're talking about, but bring elements of other music into it and kind of create something new. That for me is the future of the remix. And I think projects like this really help that.
There's also something that one of Abel's artists done, Ed Solo. Ed Solo started doing some slightly iffy reggae drum and bass remixes without clearing copyright. But then what started to happen is people who produce reggae or people who owned reggae copyrights and productions wanted that artist to remix their music in that style. So I don't know what genre you're looking at, but if you're a house music producer, there's probably someone out there who has sample material or bands who would love their stuff to be remixed in a house way. And everything's available now with the internet. Find those people who have got copyrights or who are in bands or who make reggae music or who make jazz and collaborate with them. So I think there was something up there by Electric Swing Circus, who are currently Electric Swing Band who travel. Contact these bands and say, this is my portfolio, this is what I do, I want to remix this track. Because I've found in the past, most artists say yes if you want to work on stuff. And if they're in their early stages of their career, they won't be signed up by massive management companies, massive record labels and publishers. At that level, you can have a conversation with artists and say, let's do a remix idea.
If sourcing that material is at the beginning of your process if sourcing the material is at the beginning of your process of creating the music, you're going to be ahead of the game, therefore, aren't you? Rather than having an idea and then going, fuck, how do I license it? Do you know what I mean?
If you start off by doing stuff that's going to get you heat and get you traction, so if you put up stuff that isn't going to clear, but is creatively good, that people are going to. The best form of any advertising is word of mouth. You do something when you hear a track, you go, you hear a track. The first time you ever heard it, the first thing you want to do is then play it to your friends, and they play it to their friends, and so that's the best thing to do. So if you're creating a copyright, creating a new track by taking someone else's stuff and making something new out of it, putting it up, hopefully it spreads word of mouth, and then you get traction to it. So then when you've got someone like Ed Solo who's doing these iffy bootlegs of stuff that was going out for Rudimental, were playing it in all their sets, playing it on Radio 1, the stuff was getting quite a lot of heat. So as Kev said, suddenly the labels contact you, or you go to the label. So Ed Solo's just done a bootleg remix of a new track that's coming out on London FFRR label, and so it hasn't come out yet, it's just on promo. So then I went back to FFRR and said, Ed Solo, they'd heard of him, they'd seen the tracks, and he had lots of traffic going to his social sites, lots of stuff going on there, and they said, would you want to commission this as a remix? And I'm yet to hear back, but hopefully they're going to turn around and say, yes, they will pay money for this to remix it. So I guess it's just using it as an avenue, but I think things like speaking to the bands directly, getting music like through places like this is just genius, and where you can have actual copyright and have stuff that you can use legally or clear on down the road. But it's got to be about creating music, and if you're in this business to make money nowadays, you're in the wrong business. You know, Quincy Jones, a fantastic producer, said there's no industry left in the music industry because the future is streaming, and there's very little revenue in streaming. That will change the economics around. So in the music industry, in my time, in 20 odd years, we used to do gigs to lose money to promote the records, to sell the money to make a profit, and now it's completely flipped around. So you put records out as a flyer to then get the gigs to try and make the money. And so it is really, really difficult. And you become like a news agents nowadays in the music industry. You do lots of different things for small margins, and that's how you stay alive. And music has to be more about wanting to create something and possibly a lifestyle rather than sort of like trying to make money out of it, would be my advice.
And to go back to the illegal side of it, if you have remixed someone which you can't clear, there are usually ways to get things replayed, clear just the publishing, get it re-recorded. When there's heat on something or if you believe, and I would also suggest there's lots of record labels who turn down songs that other people believe in, other people sign them up and make money from them. So if someone somewhere believes that you've done a track that should be out there, there's always ways to make it work. And I just want to point out one more thing as well about the slightly illegal side. I'm not going to mention the artist or the song that was used. A guy built an album and a reputation off of one song, and every review of that song mentioned the sample by name and by artist. So I assumed it had been cleared. The artist never got caught for illegally sampling it until he put it on an advert and took a few £1 million off of the record label. So there is a level you can get to and make money from something before you get caught for illegally sampling.
It's definitely a minefield. Any more questions? That's all very good. So the next part of London Remix Festival today starts at 5 o'clock, and we've got a whole load of bands and producers, and hopefully some of you are there, and that'll be happening upstairs in Space 2. Down here tonight is the amazing John Fairhurst, the Wigan Jimi Hendrix, meets Stay Up Forever posse, a bunch of amazing techno producers. So we're going to have a massive blues band on stage being remixed live, which is pretty amazing. And I think nearly everybody here, or anyone who's going to the Remix Speed Date, gets into that free. Anyway, I'd just like to thank the remarkable Phil Mack. You're going to hear about him forever. The wonderful Kevin from Cinema Music. Thank you so much. Your knowledge has been great. Abel Reynolds from Finger Licking. If anybody's in Brixton tonight, Abel's doing a massive True Thoughts gig down there, and it's going to be sold out by the time he gets there. Sir Alex Zicatron, all the way from Malta, the amazing copyright lawyer. And Malcolm Roxburgh and all of us lot doing Remix Space. Let's hope it works. Thank you very much.